don't distinguish between.
Okay. All right, well, it is noon and people are still trickling in, so I will just go ahead and get my script out and then I'll pass it over to you and probably turn off my camera and get this party started. It's Friday. I just thought about, I just said it's Friday and Rebecca Black just came out with an album. That's a whole different thing. Anyway, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us at Secular AZ today. We are a nonprofit organization focused on protecting the Constitution and the separation of church and state for over a decade. We've got great programming, including our Friday updates from all kinds of speakers, including historians, authors, elected officials, journalists. Next Friday, we're going to be hearing from Joseph Jafari, and he'll be speaking about the use of prison labor in Arizona. Some of you may have seen the incredible journalism that Joseph and Jimmy Jenkins did for the Arizona Republic about prison labor. And we'll be having conversations about private prisons coming up, what it's like for an inmate in Arizona's prisons and the juvenile justice system, just to name a few topics. And then next Sunday, we're actually going to be at the Willow Home Tour. So feel free to stop by your booth, our booth, if you're down in that area, or consider volunteering. It's really fun to table at these events, and we have a whole bunch coming up in the next couple of months. So if you like this kind of programming, please support the work that we do at secularaz.org and become a recurring donor to support this work here and at the legislature and at school boards and with our action alerts. But today, I'm excited to be kicking off our criminal justice series that we have going on with Amelia Cramer. She is a graduate of Dartmouth College and Stanford Law School. She was a practicing attorney for several decades. During the first half of her career, Ms. Cramer was a civil litigator at large law firms in Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Tucson. Additionally, she was the leader of two nonprofit legal organizations dedicated to LGBT civil rights, Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund in Los Angeles and GLAD in Boston. Also, she taught law briefly as an adjunct professor at UC Berkeley School of Law and as a guest lecturer at other law schools. During the second half of her career, gosh, you're not even that old, Ms. Cramer was Chief Deputy Pima County Attorney, a position in which she managed a government law office of 100 attorneys and handled special projects involving criminal justice reforms. It was in that capacity that Ms. Cramer established Pima County's drug treatment alternative to prison program and other specialty court and diversion programs. She also participated in the Safety and Justice Challenge funded by the MacArthur Foundation to reduce the local jail population and eliminate racial and ethnic disparities. Throughout her career, she has served the legal profession on numerous boards, committees, commissions, and task forces. She's past president of the State Bar of Arizona and currently serves on the Arizona Supreme Court's Task Force on Ethics for Government Lawyers. Since retiring 2 years ago, Ms. Cramer has been an active volunteer with the NAACP. She currently serves as vice president of the NAACP's Tucson branch and Criminal Justice Committee chair. Her work with the NAACP has focused upon police reform and bail reform. You know, when I looked at your bio today, Lindsay and I were commenting on, like, we need to do more with our lives because you have just such an impressive resume. And the work that you've done is just so, broad and intense and so important. So I feel really lucky to have you here today. Thank you so much for taking the time. Folks who are here, if you'd like to put questions in the chat, by all means, feel free. And Amelia, did I miss anything from your resume?
No, that's, plenty. Thank you so much for the introduction.
So I'll just go ahead and hand it off to you. I know you have a presentation for us, so go ahead and take it away.
I do. I first want to just say to you, Jeannie and Lindsay and everybody else here at Secular Arizona, thank you so much for the work that you do, which is so vitally important to protecting our constitutional rights. And thank you for having me to talk to you a little bit about bail reform and some legislation that the NAACP has pending that we hope you will support, and to tell you a little bit of the background about that. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation that is somewhat of a canned presentation that Lindsay's helping me with here. And then when we get through with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. And this is kind of my area of fun. So have some knowledge and expertise in the area, so I should be able to field any questions that you might have on this topic or other criminal justice reform topics. So a little bit first about the NAACP. Our mission is to achieve equity, political rights, and social inclusion by advancing policies and practices that expand human and civil rights, eliminate discrimination, and accelerate the well-being, education, and economic security of Black people and all persons of color. And to make this a reality, we are committed to actionable strategies to dismantle or remove barriers that perpetuate oppressive practices and race-based discrimination. It's our intention to inform the public and you all of the adverse effects of racial discrimination. And we do these informational presentations as opportunities to share with the community the impact of cash bail on communities of color and communities that experience poverty. We're also committed to working to address intersectional patterns of oppression. We work for all to be free from discrimination. So the next slide is a little bit of a background of our efforts. We focus on addressing the problems of cash bail in the state of Arizona. So in 2016, the Arizona Supreme Court had a task force on fair justice for all that issued a report that included, among other things, a recommendation on eliminating cash bail or money bail versus via a constitutional amendment, a state constitutional amendment to the Arizona Constitution. And that task force believes that Arizona should strive to eliminate money for freedom and shift to a risk-based system. So in 2022, last year, we worked to turn this into law. We proposed a constitutional amendment. Our primary sponsor in the legislature was Representative Alma Hernandez. But we were blocked in the state legislature. We lost by 1 vote in the House Judiciary Committee the opportunity to pass that legislation forward. We tried to get a strike all amendment. That was unsuccessful, and so it did not move. But I will say that since 2017, the NAACP national organization, through its national convention, adopted a resolution to support bail reform, and it reaffirmed this in 2019. And then our NAACP National Convention, again last year in 2022, reaffirmed that the NAACP is dedicated to ensuring that no person accused of a crime should be held in custody pre-trial because they do not have access to capital. So various NAACP branches around the country and across this state are working to impact bail reform in meaningful ways. Some states have already begun efforts to reform their cash bail systems, but there's a large degree of inconsistency both in the method and the application of bail reform policies. In Arizona, our NAACP Tucson branch has prepared a report and recommendations on cash bail that our state conference supports. And this was both provided to you, I think, via email before the meeting. It's on the Secular Arizona website, and there's a link to it in the chat. So on the next slide, I think it's important for us to be clear, what are we talking about? What do we mean by cash bail or money bail? We use the terms interchangeably. It's money that's paid as a condition of pretrial release to get out of jail after arrest, but before conviction of a crime. So we know that historically, cash bail or money bail was intended to ensure that a person facing charges would return for their trial or hearing. And research has demonstrated that bail is not necessary to ensure someone coming back for their court appearance. Other conditions of release that are less punitive and less restrictive can support successful return for court appearances by people who've been arrested. Now we can dig a little bit deeper into the problem. Mass incarceration disproportionately targets and locks up people of color and members of the LGBTQI community, even for offenses as minor as shoplifting a hot dog. And cash bail is really the front door to mass incarceration. So this is why we at the NAACP have worked over the past years to study the broken system of cash bail, created the detailed report that we've provided to you that explains why we are proposing legislation in Arizona to make major changes to that system. And we want to fix the system which criminalizes poverty, locks up people who cannot pay bail despite their having only been arrested for nonviolent crimes, and yet allows some who strong evidence shows have done violent crimes to buy their way out of detention. In the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how the current cash bail system, money bail system is broken. So there are two ends of the spectrum. And on the top end of the spectrum, where we have a small number of violent and dangerous people, we have some of those individuals who are arrested for first-degree murder or sexual assault, who are likely, if they're convicted, to be sentenced to decades in prison, able to pay bail and buy their way out of jail while they're waiting for trial, even though their behavior poses a serious public safety risk to the community. But if they or their associates have the financial means, they're not held in jail. And this is a serious public safety risk that in some instances has tragically resulted in additional victims in the community being assaulted and even killed. And I lost a friend in this way. Man named David Scott Anderson was killed in 2021 by someone who had committed a violent gun crime, had bail imposed, was able to pay bail, got out and committed a drive-by shooting while on release. So this is something that's happening on a regular basis in our community and is a problem. It's a small number of individuals who we believe at the NAACP should be, upon a demonstration of sufficient evidence, clear and compelling evidence that they've committed a violent crime and continue to pose a public safety risk, should be incarcerated. But the next slide, well, another example. You've probably heard about the shooter who killed a DEA agent at the train station here in October 2021. And that was another individual who was out on money bail after having committed 2 prior violent felonies. So that's the problem on one end of the spectrum. The next slide, I don't know if we're going to be able to play this video or not, but Pima County Attorney Laura Conover was interviewed last year by News 4. And if we're able to play it, that would be great. And if not, hopefully this will work. Good.
Is causing its own plague of problems within the criminal justice system. As courts backlog, more and more violent criminals are being released while they wait, putting them back in our communities and threatening your safety. Of course, Nylander looks into some of these startling stories in tonight's News 4 Tucson investigation.
We've seen criminals with a long rap sheet get released and go on to kill law enforcement officers, school teachers right here in Tucson. And for the victims' families left behind, they can't help but feel things were preventable. Diana Garaventa just had her first birthday without her son, David Anderson.
He would have been calling me. I just want him back, and I want him to be able to do all the amazing things he was getting ready to do.
David, a 30-year-old ninth grade English teacher in Tucson, was shot in the back and killed May 1st while on a routine walk through his neighborhood. It remains a mystery why he was shot.
At the wrong place at the wrong time, because it was daylight and early evening, and I don't know. They don't really know.
Police arresting 18-year-old Maurice Diaz-Casales a few days after the shooting, charged with first-degree murder. But a look at his criminal history has Diana angry and wondering why Diaz-Casales was ever released from jail. The News 4 Tucson investigators found Diaz-Casales was indicted last year on dozens of felony charges, including multiple counts of armed robbery, burglary, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and kidnapping. Investigators say he was captured in New Mexico and brought back to Tucson, where his bond was set at $100,000. He was later released to pretrial services.
And somehow he still was released. And within 90 days, not even 3 months after he left, my son died. And that's not right.
Earlier this month, DEA agent Michael Garbo was shot and killed on an Amtrak train during a drug interdiction operation. Investigators say the suspected shooter killed by return fire is Darian Taylor, a felon with a violent history out of Oakland, California, who was able to post a $255,000 bail after assaulting a police officer and trying to take their weapon while already facing a warrant for aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon, shooting into a dwelling, and cruelty to a child.
Judges have decided to let people that we normally wouldn't let out of custody. As a result of that, we've seen where those individuals have traveled to other neighboring states like Arizona and then committed much more serious crimes in those jurisdictions.
In August, there was also a shooting on an Amtrak platform in Chicago. The shooter, a man wanted for murder, also out of Alameda County, California, Sergeant Raymond Kelly with the Alameda County Sheriff's Office says violent criminals being released and reoffending has become too normal.
And we've had people leave our jail and within 10 minutes of leaving our jail, go out and carjack people.
In Maricopa County earlier this month, Sheriff's Deputy Juan Reese was beaten to death while booking Clinton Hurley for violating parole. He has a history of several felonies, including attempted child molestation.
The cash system that we are stuck with by law in Arizona is frustrating.
Pima County Attorney Laura Conover says her office wants to change the cash bail system, but can't by Arizona law. She believes it allows dangerous felons who can afford to make bail able to get out, while those with perhaps a less violent background who are poor left in jail.
It's just failing us on both ends of the spectrum. And I will say that statistically, the problem is we have hundreds of people in the jail who shouldn't be because the cash system criminalizes poverty.
Diana agrees the current system is broken, but she's more concerned about how dangerous criminals will be kept behind bars.
We can't hold criminals, especially physically violent criminals in jail pending trials. Then, there's no point in arresting them to begin with.
Diaz-Casales is now being held without bond. Tucson this year broke its homicide rate with the highest on record with more than 80. Investigating for you, Cor Snowlander, News 4 Tucson.
Thanks. Then we can go to the next slide. And, as you heard, the next one after that, is Pima County Attorney.
Its own plague of problems within the criminal justice system.
Do you want me to go ahead and play?
Yeah, if you can flip to the next slide, that'll stop the one after that. There we go.
Get it? Okay.
Yes, thank you. So as we heard from Pima County Attorney Laura Conover, there are, whoops, it went back. You did forward to the next slide and the two slides, whatever. There we go, that one. There are problems at both ends of the spectrum, and there are only very few of these individuals who've committed violent and dangerous crimes where there's significant evidence that they've committed those crimes who we believe should be held without the ability to buy their way out of jail. Many, many, many more people are being punished by being incarcerated pretrial, even though they did not commit any violent crime and are not a public safety risk because of poverty. And bail disparities are punitive. So these individuals who are arrested for nonviolent crimes such as shoplifting, trespassing, or simple drug possession get stuck in jail while they await their trials due to a lack of funds to pay bail. They serve weeks, sometimes even months of time incarcerated, sometimes losing their jobs, losing their housing, even losing child custody, even though their sentence, if they're ultimately convicted, would be to probation out in the community, not incarceration. And according to a report in the Bureau of Justice Statistics from 2021, about 65% of jail inmates were held in pretrial detention with no conviction, awaiting court action. Most recent statistic I'm aware of from the Pima County Jail is that about 90% of jail inmates are pretrial. The money bail system keeps poor people locked up due to their inability to pay. The majority of Americans cannot pay $400 in an emergency, but in Pima County, the average bail is set over $2,000, well beyond the reach of so many. On any given day, there are likely to be approximately 200 people in the Pima County Jail awaiting trial on misdemeanors, low-level crimes, for which they likely would be given probation, not prison or jail time, if they're convicted. These people are sitting in jail only because they're unable to pay bail imposed on them as a condition of pretrial release. And we know that detention, even very brief, that is not necessary to protect public safety, but is due to an inability to pay, results in harm to those incarcerated and to their families in areas of health, employment, increased recidivism, meaning likely to commit more crimes, disrupted and displaced families, and damage to community well-being, and is therefore extremely costly to society. Disparities in the effects of the cash bail system may be due to poverty or to race, ethnicity, or membership in other marginalized groups, such as the LGBTQI community, people with mental illness or substance use disorder, and people who are unhoused. And as with other aspects of the criminal justice system, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and those of Latinx ethnicity experience disproportionate effects from the cash bail system. Quoting the Vera Institute of Justice in 2020, Black people are hit the hardest. Systemic inequality begets the Black-white wealth gap, where Black families are far less likely to have money for bail. That inequity is compounded by the potential for racism and disparate treatment by prosecutors and judges in the bail decision itself. Studies that compare the cases of Black and white people facing similar charges and with similar histories of criminal justice involvement find that bail is routinely set significantly higher for Black people than their white counterparts. This is not necessarily due to institutional racism. Often it's due to unconscious bias or implicit bias built into the system in the way risk is assessed. The public safety assessment or risk instrument used by many states, including Arizona, as mandated by the Arizona Supreme Court to be used in every county to assess a person's risk pretrial, measures risk of likelihood to fail to appear and risks of likelihood to reoffend. This risk assessment has been shown to contribute to racial disparities in the pretrial population, likely due to the heavy weighting of prior criminal history, because Black people have been disproportionately targeted for arrests, even for nonviolent minor offenses such as trespassing, shoplifting food, or simple possession of drugs for personal use. Recently, the percentage of African Americans in the Pima County Jail has been running at 3 times or 4 times the percentage of African Americans in the Tucson community. And several recent studies find that pretrial detention leads to a higher likelihood of conviction, driven by an increased likelihood of pleading guilty. People who are in detention at the time of trial are more likely to be convicted and get longer sentences. Okay, next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the costs here in terms of finances. Detaining people in jail results in enormous costs to local law enforcement, courts, administration, and taxpayers. The average pretrial length of stay was 22 days in 2020 in Pima County. At a cost in our county of $141 a day for every person in jail, that comes to a cost of a total of over $3,100 for the average person's stay in jail at taxpayer expense. And that's what that left column should be showing is $3,100. There are other ways to ensure that individuals who are arrested show up for their future court dates instead of caging them in jail. Electronic monitoring, if needed, costs only $11 per day. In our county, a few years ago, there was a woman who was held 45 days in jail awaiting her court appearance because she could not pay bail. Her underlying crime, shoplifting a candy bar. She was dealing with mental health issues before incarceration, likely also aggravated by being locked up for a month and a half. When she finally came before a judge, the judge's only condition of her release was that she connect with a mental health service provider in the courtroom before she left. But that 45 days in jail cost not only a lot of money, but added trauma to her and made it much more likely that she would commit future crimes. The next slide will show how that money saved from reducing the number of people held in jail before trial can be used and redistributed to pay for services for those people while they await their trials outside the jail in the community, including housing for the unhoused, transportation, and counseling. These kinds of services can help the individuals themselves and their families reduce their recidivism and make it more likely that they will come to trial. And just as an aside, one of the things that we in the NAACP and I personally have been involved with is making sure that those services in the community are not conditioned upon somebody participating in religious indoctrination and that they be secular in nature. The next slide talks a little bit about our solution, and this is where I really want to focus. The NAACP is seeking to pass legislation that we have entitled Safer Communities, Secure Families, and Pretrial Justice for All. We have a bill, HB 2398, that contains legislative amendments to 2 Arizona statutes to protect public safety, decriminalize poverty, and prevent our jails from being stuffed with people who should not be there. So here's what the legislation will do. For safer communities, our proposal will provide that a person who's arrested for a violent felony crime, whose behavior is demonstrated by clear and convincing evidence at a court hearing to pose an ongoing danger to the community, can then be held in jail until their trial and no longer will be able to buy their way out of jail and back into the community by paying money bail. For secure families, our proposal will stop disrupting families by preventing people from being jailed before their trial when they are presumed innocent if the only thing they're accused of is a low-level misdemeanor for which they would likely only get probation, which is community supervision, not incarceration, if they're convicted. Other conditions of release instead of pretrial incarceration can allow them to keep their jobs, support their families, will reduce recidivism, enhance their return for court appearance, and possibly link them with needed treatment and other resources while they're out in the community. For pretrial justice for all, our legislative proposal requires a judge to assess ability to pay before assigning bail and work to avoid implicit bias through attention to racial and ethnic disparities that historically have negatively impacted communities of color. Our proposal is right on crime and will save taxpayer dollars as well. So we've taken action. We're holding these community informational forums to increase awareness of the issue, to provide data regarding the impact of cash bail. And there's a lot more about that in the report that you have available to you. Careful review of our research on cash bail reform demonstrates how to avoid problems that other states have faced when attempting similar reforms. There have been a number of successes. New York State prohibited cash bail for most misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. Illinois in 2021, effective January of 2023, just last month, totally abolished cash bail. New Jersey got rid of cash bail and reduced the number of those detained pretrial by 44%. New Mexico passed a constitutional amendment providing that no one can be detained due to inability to pay. And recent attacks on bail reform as allegedly causing increased crime are in large part disingenuous, as crimes rose during the pandemic with or without bail reform and are now falling. Most of the jurisdictions where reforms are heavily critiqued involve the problem of releasing violent felons. Our proposal addresses and eliminates that problem. We've incorporated lessons learned from other states into our legislative proposal to eliminate cash bail. In this legislative session, we're asking for a statutory change, which is somewhat of a compromise for us, to eliminate the option for bail in all misdemeanor cases and require the judge to determine a person's ability to pay before assigning bail in other cases. Under our proposal that was developed by the NAACP, judges would retain discretion to hold in jail those whose behavior poses a high risk to public safety and set conditions of release for the rest as alternatives to incarceration and money bail. We've got to stop confining people simply due to poverty. Only the least restrictive conditions of release necessary to still protect public safety should be required. And then on the next slide, I want to highlight some of our success thus far in moving forward. We have, I guess the next one, go to the next slide of that. Yeah, we have 7 co-sponsors led by Representative Alma Hernandez. It's a bipartisan group that has sponsored our legislation. We have support from the Pima County Board of Supervisors. We have support from the Pima County Sheriff and the Cochise County Sheriff. We have support in whole or in part from a number of prosecutors for our proposal. And though our previous more expansive constitutional amendment proposal was voted down last year on partisan lines in the House Judiciary Committee, we're committed to trying for passage of this revised, more modest bipartisan proposal in the current legislative session, and we are not giving up. So we hope to continue to engage with Secular Arizona and to have your active support for this legislation as well. We believe that cash bail is the front door to mass incarceration, creating a type of debtor's prison. And the purpose of incarceration should be to keep the community safe, not to punish those who lack financial means. The current system, we believe, both endangers public safety and criminalizes poverty. And then the next slide, just want to, one more here, I guess. Yeah, let you know that you can find more information from the NAACP if you like. There's a website link there that you can use to either become a member or find out more information. If you have any questions or comments or concerns or want more information, you can send us an email to the NAACP Tucson branch at gmail.com, and that will make its way to me or to President Dr. Cherie Meeks, and we'd be happy to respond to that. And at this point, I think it's best if I just turn it over to you all to find out what is your area of interest, what questions you may have, and I'd be happy to respond to whatever you like.
Thank you so much. That was really informative. There are a couple of questions here. You know, the first thing I thought of too was Khalif Browder. who, you know, languished at Rikers Island for, what was it, 3 years or almost 3 years, you know, just the most horrendous circumstances. And it was for, you know, stealing a backpack, and the family couldn't come up with bail. And while he managed to get out because of, you know, national media attention, he, you know, ended up taking his own life. And meanwhile, if you've got the money, but you did commit the crime, you can get out, you know. And in a way, it kind of makes me think about, you know, Christianity in a way, a little bit like, you know, if you just, you know, believe in Jesus, even if you've done horrible things, you can get away with it. And it's, you know, the cash bail system is kind of reminds me of that. There's a really good question here that came up first from Greg Jackson, and it says, curious of some specifics on the rationale used from those resisting this change. What is their concern? Because we always hear them talk about, right, like how, oh, our streets aren't safe, and, you know, any election cycle, they start talking about that. So what is their rationale?
So I will tell you that the primary rationale that I've heard is threefold. First, this is the way it's always been done. And, you know, we need more people to be locked up to eliminate the problems on our streets. You know, I'm never a proponent of, well, we've always done it this way, so it must be right. To me, it just means we've always done it this way. It doesn't mean it must be right. Another one is from prosecutors who say, well, I agree with you that we're locking up too many of the wrong people, but I don't want to take away one of the tools in my toolbox. So if we don't have money bail for misdemeanors, then these people will get out and won't show up for their court hearings, and how are we going to adjudicate their cases? And there are a lot of responses to that. And the third one is simply, we don't believe you that these people won't commit more crimes if they're released, and that they won't flee the jurisdiction, despite all the research and data that's demonstrated that to be the case. So our response to that is basically, well, at least let us try it on a pilot basis, and try it with misdemeanors where we know these are not people that are posing a danger to the community. So we have a lot of responses, but those are the reasons that we get in opposition primarily.
And you mentioned the bill that Representative Hernandez and others have co-sponsored. I put the link in there. I believe he said 2398. And Judith is here and saying it has been assigned to the Judiciary Committee, but not scheduled on the agenda yet. So,
right. Representative, and you know, we're getting to the end of the time frame when bills can be heard in the House, that were introduced in the House, and it's going to be next week. And Representative Nguyen, who's the new chair of the Judiciary Committee this year, is from Yavapai County. He's a Republican. So far, he's been unwilling to have a hearing in the Judiciary Committee on any bill whose primary sponsor is a Democrat. So we're working through Representative Hernandez, Representative Cano, who's one of the co-sponsors, who is the minority leader in the House, and a couple of the Republican co-sponsors, to try to persuade Representative Nguyen to change his mind and at least give us a hearing. We're not optimistic, but it's possible. We still do think it's helpful for folks to go into the RTS online system with the legislature to give it a thumbs up to show how many people care about this. There's also a remote possibility for a strike-all amendment that is being considered. And, you know, if we don't pass it this year, we'll be back again next year to try it again. We've been reaching out to Republican sheriffs and Republican county attorneys, asking them to support the bill and to encourage Representative Nguyen to go forward and support it. And so we have received support from a Republican sheriff in Cochise County. We've received partial support from a couple of Republican county attorneys, but as yet no active support, and they're not willing to undertake affirmative steps to contact Representative Nguyen. However, the Arizona Prosecuting Attorneys Association, which is the lobbying organization for the county attorneys and the attorney general, is going to be reconsidering this week. I met with one of their members 2 days ago, and he indicated that he now thinks that this may be a good bill. And so there's some glimmer of hope out there, but not a lot.
I'm curious, do you think if we do have folks who are in Yavapai County or in Nguyen's district, does making that phone call, would that sway him, or is this commitment to not hearing any Democratic bills like steadfast?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. It cannot hurt, certainly, for anybody who's in his district to reach out and ask him to simply give the bill a hearing. I will say that Representative Nguyen's hearings are 3 people per side, 1 minute each. So it's not a lot of time to make our case, but hey, I'll take 3 minutes over 0 and an opportunity for a vote in his committee. So if anybody is in Yavapai County, can reach out to the Representative Nguyen, and urge him at least to give us a hearing in his committee next week. That would be terrific.
Well, and you brought up the difference too between incarcerating somebody in a facility and then having a ankle bracelet. It's they talk about fiscal responsibility a lot, right? So perhaps that's the strategy too, to talk about the taxpayer dollars and how much money could be saved through alternative means to incarceration for pretrial.
That is one thing that it does appeal to Republicans, is the fiscal cost savings immediately with regards to the cost of jail versus release. Some of the conditions, electronic monitoring does have a cost. Don't think it should be borne by the RSD, but by the community, but it's a lot cheaper than jail. And there are other conditions of release that don't have to involve that cost. For example, release on the condition that the individual reside at a place that houses houseless individuals or at a treatment facility. They can't be mandated to engage in treatment pretrial, but they can be mandated to live at the facility and not to leave the facility. And that does a couple of things in terms of cost savings. One, it reduces the cost that would otherwise be paid for incarceration in the jail, but it also shifts the cost for medical and mental health care, if any is needed, from the county that pays for the jail to Medicaid, which is paid for access in Arizona, which is paid for in part by federal tax dollars in addition to local and state tax dollars. And the reason that's important is because a lot of crimes are the result of substance use disorder, the fentanyl epidemic, opioid epidemic, a lot of drugs pouring through the southern border of the United States, and a lot of our border counties are bearing the cost of this. And by getting folks out of jail and into other facilities where they're in the community, putting them on access funding for their medical and mental health care spreads the cost of that out nationally rather than having it borne locally. So it's a huge cost savings overall. And a lot of the time what we hear from judges is, well, I'm going to impose this money bail because I know this guy can't pay, and that way he'll be in jail and I know he'll show up for his next court hearing. Well, the problem with that is what we've seen is it increases recidivism, because that guy shows up for his next court hearing, he pleads guilty and gets time served. He's released and goes right back out and shoplifts food from the Circle K because he's homeless and has no other way to eat. So we're not making him better, we're harming that individual by traumatizing him. We're paying more money than we would otherwise pay if he were released to a homeless housing facility in the interim. And we're just spending a lot of money on law enforcement picking that person up, taking them to the jail, processing them, prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, the whole system coming into play is actually increasing rather than reducing the problem. And that's a huge cost. That recidivism is a huge cost. We had a guy who was incarcerated 41 times in Pima County within an 18-month period on low-level misdemeanor crimes, shoplifting food, trespassing at a Circle K, urinating in public because he was homeless. This guy's someone who suffered from substance use disorders. And his final arrest was for shoplifting a Coke and a hot dog to eat. We ended up trying a pilot program with some grant funding where his only condition of release from jail, instead of imposing bail, the judge agreed to release him on the condition that he reside at Amity Foundation's treatment facility. And he agreed to that. He was transported by the sheriff's department to the treatment facility. They were responsible to transport him to and from his subsequent court hearings. He later pled guilty, and his only condition of probation was to stay living at the treatment facility for 3 more months. 5 years later, he had never committed another crime. Wow. So that 41 times he was incarcerated cost Pima County $64,000.
Wow.
The treatment, which they paid for 6 months, was $18,000, but there was no other money spent on arrests, medical care, prosecution, defense, court. So just if you compare jail bed costs to the treatment center costs, it was much less money and solved the problem for him and for the community. So it's a win-win, and that's an example of what we can do with all of these people who haven't committed violent crimes. And I see Diane Post, she's the lawyer for the NAACP. She's a brilliant woman, a wonderful advocate on these issues. was involved with the Supreme Court's task force on fair justice for all that recommended elimination of cash bail. And she's got a lot of important information as well on this subject, I think.
Well, and it makes me think too about because unfortunately, for those of us here or on Facebook or wherever who go and listen to these committee hearings, there's, when you talk about compassion for other people, unfortunately, it usually falls on deaf ears. So perhaps the financial aspect of it and the cost to taxpayers and how much money we could save could be the other, strategy, because, we can talk about caring about teachers or caring about LGBTQ youth or caring about folks who are incarcerated. But if you talk about the money, then maybe they'll listen better.
Right. One other thing I would talk about is the victims of these nonviolent crimes. So Circle K, where that guy was shoplifting 41 times in 18 months, it's not only that they lost money from the food that he shoplifted, but he was driving away their other customers because he was, smelled bad and was acting strange and, was trespassing at times. They wanted him to leave, and their only recourse was to call police and have him removed from their premises. They were losing business. It was affecting the bottom line for this small business. And that's the case for a lot of small businesses, particularly in our cities, where we have unhoused people who suffer from substance use disorder and mental illness, sometimes both, who are committing these low-level nonviolent crimes. They are sort of a plague on small businesses. So if we can get them to stop coming back by having real solutions instead of these temporary expensive band-aids of putting them in the jail for a few days or a few weeks, that is actually a long-term solution that will help address this problem that many, crime victims are complaining about.
But when we first got started, I was talking about how in other states and municipalities they've adopted the more like, okay, here's this kind of yes no questions, and you can, and you probably have the actual term for it, but where it's more automated based on certain factors, and you fill those factors in, and then it determines like whether there should be cash bail, how much it should be, whether they should have an ankle monitor or whatever. And I feel like those programs are relatively new, but have there been any kind of like longitudinal studies about those programs and the benefits to law enforcement, the judicial system, the community, et cetera?
So what you're talking about is the PSA, or the Pretrial Risk Assessment Tool. The Arnold Foundation has developed one such instrument that has been mandated by Arizona's Supreme Court to be used in all of the counties throughout the state of Arizona by the Pretrial Services Division of the court. I will say there are some benefits of the PSA and there are some problems with it. So what it measures is it measures risk to reoffend and risk to fail to appear. Okay, reoffend is different from hurting somebody. So if we look at the risk to reoffend, if somebody is a first-time arrestee on a sexual assault on a minor charge, they are only 5% likely to reoffend. If somebody is a third-time arrestee on a possession of fentanyl charge, they are 95% likely to reoffend. But which offense are we more concerned about? Obviously, the dangerous offense. So risk to reoffend is not the only thing we should be measuring. We should be measuring risk to public safety. The other thing is risk to fail to appear. The guy who's a fentanyl addict is not very likely to show up for his court hearing without some assistance, okay? Because he doesn't have a calendar, isn't showing up to things on time, maybe high in difficulty getting there. That doesn't mean he's fleeing to Mexico or to another state intentionally to avoid a court hearing. In fact, law enforcement may be able to tell you exactly what park he lives in and where, and be able to go scoop him up and get him to his court hearing. So risk to fail to appear is not flight risk. Those are two different things. So what I think, need to be measuring is not only risk to reoffend and risk to fail to appear, but number one, how dangerous based on evidence is this person if released out into the community? And number two, is there an actual flight risk? And if somebody does not pose a physical safety risk to anybody in the community, then there are much better ways to deal with getting that person to their court hearing than keeping them in the jail. So the PSA is valuable, but it's not a panacea. And it can't just be sort of a computerized decision-making. We do need judges to overlay common sense and knowledge. There's, in Arizona, another risk assessment that is really terrific, which is the appraise instrument. It's the Arizona Intimate Partner Risk Assessment System for domestic violence of intimate partners. And that shows whether somebody's likely to commit another subsequent assault within the next 7 months that would lead to physical injury or death. And that is a really valuable risk assessment for judges to use. Again, though, if the person has committed a low-level misdemeanor, maybe they shouted at their partner and threw the cell phone on the ground, a misdemeanor, not a felony, they didn't cause serious physical injury, and they're arrested for that misdemeanor domestic violence, it's actually better to release that person, even if they pose a high risk on that risk assessment, into the community. Why? Because if they're in the jail and they're the primary breadwinner, the victim's likely to recant. And if it's, testimony only as to whether this crime occurred, he may not be able to be convicted and won't get the counseling that's mandated on probation for people who are convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence. So it's actually better for the family and the victim if the person can be released into the community with a condition to not contact the victim. If we think there's a serious safety risk, electronic monitoring with geofencing can be used. And so that's actually preferable to jail for that type of situation. So what I would say is these risk assessment instruments that you're talking about are extremely valuable pieces of evidence, but they shouldn't be the only evidence that judges are considering when establishing conditions of release.
There are a few comments here. I'm going to try to hit them. Let's see. Diane says a short-term stay has horrible consequences: loss of job, loss of housing, towing of car that cannot be retrieved, loss of the property, has loss of children who may be left alone, putting them into the foster care system, property, etc. So that's just more of a comment than a question. Another comment, doing what makes sense on fiscal and safety grounds versus not hearing a Democratic bill. Yay, Arizona legislature. And then she says, money is partly why Arpaio lost the election to Penzone. I'm not quite sure what she means by that one, but
I think part of that was the money that was being spent on lawsuits to defend Arpaio's unconstitutional practices.
Yeah. And then Diane agrees, problem of the automated program is that it's based on number of times arrested and how early in life. Absolutely discrimination against African Americans. And she goes on to say that studies have been done about simply reminding them to come to court, and it works. Yeah. Do you have any commentary about that kind of like texting program or anything?
That does work, and there's a lot more detail in our report about this, but what I will say is there's a pilot program now in Pima County to provide cell phones to individuals who've been arrested who don't have them, to enable texting to remind them to get to court. Dentists and doctors have learned that if you text people reminders, they're more likely to show up for their appointments. The same is true for people who've been arrested. Not everybody is totally on top of all of their appointments. It's not necessarily that they're intending to avoid court, but that's just that they have, spaced it out, and so those reminders do work.
Yeah, and I don't see any more questions. If you do have any questions for Amelia about the cash bail system or other issues within the criminal justice system, let's see. We have been known to space out a meeting or two ourselves. Ain't that the truth?
She's teasing me. I missed a meeting a couple of days ago by an hour. I spaced it out and missed it. So it does happen, even with people with reminders and phones and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, if it isn't on my Google Calendar, then it doesn't exist. And yeah, it's important to have those reminders for all of us. So, so what can we do, like you said already, you have this bill out. Are you optimistic that it's actually going to get that committee hearing, or?
I'm pessimistic, but what I will say is it's extremely important to demonstrate support for the bill. So if you each could, write to your two representatives an email saying you support HB 2398 on bail reform, pretrial reform, that you, if you're on the RTS system and you know how to work that, you can go give a thumbs up for that bill in the online system with the state legislature. That's extremely valuable. And it will encourage a hearing the more people do that. If you happen to live in Yavapai County, and you can contact Representative Nguyen and ask him on the phone and via email to give this bill a hearing in the Judiciary Committee, that would be the most powerful thing.
Well, and in our coalition, I belong to several different coalitions that lobby at the Capitol, that do lobbying at, Board of Supervisors, whatever. And we're really focused this year on the positive bills. The bills that are, for example, I think that it was Athena Salmon who put forward a bill about dental care for pregnant people on access, right? It's a nominal cost. It would include dental care because we know that if your teeth aren't good, then and you're pregnant, it could open you up to different kinds of infections, harm the baby, et cetera. And every year the bill, whether it makes it never goes through the finish line. And so we're really trying to talk to our members and people who are engaged with what's going on at the Capitol or their municipalities to really support the good bills out there so that perhaps they can get a hearing. And so I really like that because unfortunately over the past forever, we're always kind of being reactive instead of proactive, right? And we're always like fighting against instead of fighting for. And I feel like if we can really promote these and blast them out on our social media, these good bills, then it gives us a vision for what we could have in 2024. And it kind of contrasts when we promote these bills about dental care or saving counties lots and lots of money by altering the cash bail system, then people can see that and see that, oh, but instead we're focused on pronouns, or we're focused on making sure that all domestic perpetrators of domestic violence have access to guns. So it provides a stark contrast, I think. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think, this is one of those proactive pieces of legislation that, we're back with a compromise version this year, and we aren't going to give up, and we're going to keep at it until it passes. And I do think, if we did have a Democratic majority, it would be more likely to pass, but we're going to try to get it through this year if we can. If we can't, we'll come back next year. We do have bipartisan co-sponsorship of the bill this year. If we have to come back with a Republican lead sponsor next year, we'll do that because we already have 2 Republicans who have sponsored this bill. And so, we're going to do whatever it takes to get it passed. We think, it is fiscally responsible. It's for the benefit of victims. It's for the benefit of family members of those accused of crimes. And it's a win-win for public safety, for fiscal responsibility, and for what I think should be the purpose of the criminal justice system, which is to protect community safety and then to transition people into treatment who are committing crimes not because they have a criminal mind, but because they suffer from substance use disorder or mental illness or both. And we're not only criminalizing poverty, we're criminalizing illness in that way, and jailing someone who suffers in that way makes them worse, not better. So we're not going to reduce crime until we start treating those folks the way that they need to be treated to get better.
Yeah, one of the upcoming speakers, I believe on the 24th of this month, is a mother to a young man who is currently incarcerated. In fact, our sons grew up together, and her son suffers from severe mental illness, and he's currently incarcerated, currently in solitary, is not allowed to even have visitors. They can't even apply to visit him until January of 2025. He's not getting the mental health care that he needs. And we're paying for this young man suffering, basically. And again, this is why, at first, when we discuss this series, it really is a secular issue because, if folks who are in charge who want to use religious exemptions for all kinds of things and claim that their faith is the most important. Well, let's talk about that faith and how people should be treated, and the fact that most religious leaders who they should have a more compassionate kind of approach to things. And so what we find, though, is that it's those of us who are the nuns or the atheists, agnostic, humanists, secularists, spiritual people that tend to be more compassionate in that way. And that young man certainly isn't really on the receiving end of much compassion in our carceral system.
I will say, although we have, a Republican legislature right now that's not necessarily, as you indicate, open-minded as much to these issues other than the fiscal ones. We have a new governor who's selecting a new head of the Department of Corrections and is very open to making changes. So, after you hear from the speaker who is your friend, it may be worth your organization contacting the governor's office and the new director of corrections to just let them know about this individual experience. I suspect that they may be able to provide a remedy not only to her, but a more broad remedy for that in the future. I think the governor is very open to that, and now is a good time to try to reach out for some success in that area.
That is such a good point, really, because, I've actually known Katie Hobbs for over a decade now through the Emerge program. And so that really is a great suggestion because, I know I can see how heavily it weighs on my friend and how difficult the situation has been from the get-go. And it's part too of our failing or of our underfunded school system, because I remember him being a little boy. And there just weren't he was brilliant, one of the smartest kids that I've ever met, but the schools weren't equipped to handle his brilliance and his, the mental illness that he suffers from. So it really is a good example of the school to prison pipeline too, unfortunately, because he was suspended so many times because of his behavior. And so here he is now, a young man of 24, 25 years old, and this is his experience. And if he just had the medication and the help that he needed from womb to tomb, then he would be a very productive member, a brilliant, productive member of our society. Are there any, last question, because it is 12:56, who would you say, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but who are the allies from the Republican side that you have in either chamber that you can maybe make some headway with?
Well, I don't have the bill right in front of me, but we've got, I'm blanking on the names of the Republican sponsors on it, but I can email you with those. They're on the bill itself, which I think you have attached to the materials. And, they've actually been reached out to by Representative Hernandez because she tends to work across the aisle quite a bit. The Republicans that we've been engendering support from have been Sheriff Daniels in Cochise County, immediate past County Attorney Sheila Polk in Yavapai County, and reaching out to, some other Republicans around the state for support. I think somebody's got a note.
Somebody just put it in there. So it's Hernandez.
Yep. Are both
Yeah.
Republicans.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So there are some folks who do support that, and as we all probably should, because it's pretty clear as the number one, we have the largest prison system in the world, right? In the United States, it's the largest prison population. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense for folks to just languish away in prison, especially over those years.
Yeah, and jail. So jail and prison are different. Jail, this is the pretrial,
Right.
people with sentences to a year. One of the things that we've seen a lot lately is overdose deaths and suicides in the Pima County Jail. And the sheriff in Pima County, Chris Nanos, is very supportive of this bill because he believes it would help to reduce the jail population and enable him to focus on incarcerating folks who pose a public safety risk. And if he can reduce the population, he can better, keep an eye on folks who might be a risk for suicide or overdose and treat them better. So that's partly why we have support from the sheriffs, is because they're the ones that operate the jails and they see that this needs to change.
Right. Well, boy, this has been a great discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And thank you for the vast body of work that you've done throughout your whole entire life on the side of right. I just appreciate you. And I'm really glad that we got connected. I believe it was through Diane Poe. So thanks, Diane, for that connection. And if there's nothing else, if you want to leave us with some parting words, okay. So last week we had on, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to remember his name now. But he, because every Friday, sometimes our discussions are a little bit depressing because of the things that we talk about. So what his question, and I'm just going to go ahead and steal it. What have you seen on the internet this week that made you happy or gave you hope?
Oh, that made me happy or gave me hope. Rescues of these poor people in the earthquake torn areas of Turkey and Syria, you know, rescuing men, women, and children who are in the rubble, and just seeing how much commitment there is to try to save people who can be saved. That was just amazing.
Yeah, I actually watched some of those videos today, and they are pretty inspiring. So, well, thank you again, Amelia. Thanks to everybody who joined us today. We'll be back next Friday. Oh gosh, Lindsay, I just said it earlier. Oh, it's going to be Joseph Joffrey, and he is going to be talking about prison labor and who uses that prison labor, how much they get paid, and the conditions under which they're able or unable to work. So thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a great weekend.